Welcome back to New User Orientation for the 2021 ProWeb program. I'm Brandy Bailey, a trainer here at TaxSlayer Pro Support. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through preparing a very simple return in ProWeb so that you can get a feel for how the menus flow when you're in return preparation. We're going to start out on TaxSlayerPro.com. I'd like to show you the Resources and Tax Education tab, where you can access tax preparer resources. We have training and seminars. We have links to our blog and other resources to help you in your tax preparation journey. Right now, we're going to go under Tax Preparer Resources and select Practice Tax Returns. We have 7 practice returns and answer keys. I highly recommend that you try a couple of these tax returns before tax season begins. And if you have any preparers in your office who are not experienced in using ProWeb or in preparing returns at all, this is a great resource to train your preparers before the tax season. I'm going to select exercise number 1 from the practice tax returns. You can also select to download the answer keys. Next, we'll click download PDF for the return and for the answer key. And you can see the PDFs download to the bottom corner of the browser. Remember, in the first video, I recommended that you use Google Chrome for the best experience in ProWeb. Let's open up the PDF for Practice Tax Return number 1. In this simple return, we're going to cover a taxpayer who has daycare and earned income credit. There's one dependent on this return. Daycare information has been provided, and they've got a simple W-2 for income. This return won't take much time, but it will give you a lot of information about how to use ProWeb. So let's get started. We're here at online.taxslayerpro.com, the login page of ProWeb. Put in your username and password and log in with me. Remember, you can use forgot username or forgot password to recover those credentials at any time. And let's verify our account. All right, we're here on the main menu of the 2021 ProWeb program. We'll start here, Start New 2021 Tax Return. We'll start by entering the taxpayer's Social Security number. Once you've got the Social Security number entered twice, click Start Return. A pop-up message will tell you to make sure to get your 7216 consent to use tax return information signed before starting a new return. This is if you're going to be applying a bank product to a return. It's just a simple reminder, and we'll click OK. Every return in ProWeb begins by entering the social and then choosing the filing status for the taxpayer. If you're looking at the PDF of Practice Exercise 1, you'll see that this taxpayer's filing status is Head of Household. So we will select that here. When you're working on a return that's not a practice exercise and you need help determining the filing status of a taxpayer, you can choose the Filing Status Wizard here. And again, this is one of those resources that would be good for new preparers to use in your office. We're going to click Continue now. We're here on the main page of the return. We're going to enter in all of the information from exercise number 1's PDF. And then after we've got the information entered for this return, I will show you some tips and tricks of how to navigate this page. Let's get the taxpayer's name in first. Their name is Whitney M. Refund, and there's no suffix. I'm using Tab to move between these entry fields, but you could click into each one individually if that style of working suits you. Their occupation is librarian. Their date of birth, March 1st, 1978, 3/1/1978. Let's take a look at these checkboxes here to see if any of these apply to Whitney Refund. First, can the taxpayer be claimed as a dependent on someone else's return? Whitney is Head of Household here, and she is not a dependent on anyone else's return. Is the taxpayer over age 18 and a full-time student at an eligible educational institution? There is no school information on this practice return, so we will leave that blank. Next, is the taxpayer blind or deceased? That does not apply here, so we'll leave them blank. We can check this box if the taxpayer wishes to contribute $3 to the Presidential Election Campaign Fund. We'll go ahead and click that. Next, is the taxpayer or spouse served in a combat zone during the current tax year? This taxpayer did not. We'll leave it blank. Next, does the taxpayer wish to elect to use their 2019 earned income to figure their 2021 earned income credit? We will leave that blank. Was the taxpayer affected by a natural disaster during the current tax year? We don't have that information. We'll leave it blank for now. Has the taxpayer received, sold, sent, exchanged, or otherwise acquired financial interest in virtual currency during the tax year? We'll leave that blank. Next, the taxpayer prefers to receive written communications from the IRS in a language other than English. Our taxpayer hasn't stated that preference, so we'll leave it blank. The final checkbox, the taxpayer prefers to receive written communication from the IRS in an accessible format. We may have to consult our taxpayer to see if that is true. For right now, we will leave it blank. Next, we'll enter Whitney's address and phone number. Looking over her information, I do not see a stateside military address. But if a taxpayer has one of those, we could mark this box. And if the taxpayer has a foreign address, we'll want to check this box to change the address fields to accommodate foreign countries and postal codes. Whitney has a domestic address, so we will leave that box blank. And let's enter her address information now. If there's an apartment number, we could put that here. We'll put in the zip code. And once I tab, the program automatically fills in the town and state based on the zip code that I provided. Next, we'll enter the daytime telephone number. And Whitney has provided a secondary telephone number because she wants to use a bank product. So we will enter that phone number here. Before we move on, I want to mention that all bank applications for bank products do require 2 telephone numbers from the taxpayer, and the secondary telephone number cannot be the ERO or preparer's phone number. If you try to put the ERO or preparer's phone number on the bank application as the taxpayer's secondary telephone number, that bank application will be rejected. The taxpayer needs to present a second telephone number for their bank application to be accepted. Once you have those telephone numbers in, review the information for the taxpayer and click Continue. Next, we'll get the question to verify the Georgia return information. Does your address differ from the Georgia return filed last year? We'll say no. Next, we'll enter the taxpayer's email address. And when we've got that in, we'll click Continue. Next, the program wants to know if this taxpayer has a dependent or qualifying person. We'll choose Yes. Here on the Dependent menu, we need to enter the information for Whitney's dependent. We'll start with the name, next, the date of birth, and next we need to put in the Social Security number. You can also enter an ITIN or an ATIN in this space if that applies to the dependent. If the dependent did not have a social, an ITIN, or an ATIN, we could check this box. Next, for credits, we need to answer the question, is this dependent a U.S. citizen, U.S. national, or U.S. resident alien? If they were not, the taxpayer couldn't claim the child tax credit or credit for other dependents for this person. Our dependent is a U.S. citizen, so we'll choose yes. Next, we need to enter the relationship. For calculating credits, we need to know the number of months that the dependent lived in the taxpayer's home during 2021. The drop-down menu here has all of the numbers of months possible for the year, but also the choices 0, lived in Canada, lived in Mexico, divorce or separation, kidnapped, or other reasons. So if those scenarios apply, you would select them here. And there's a note here that if the dependent was born in the tax year, you can go ahead and select 12 months. Next, we need to carefully read over the choices here. Was the dependent over 18 and a full-time student at an eligible educational institution? Was the dependent disabled? We can mark this box if the qualifying child is not the taxpayer's dependent. We can check here if the taxpayer did not wish to claim the dependent for the earned income credit. We can check here if the dependent is married. We must check this box if the dependent made over $4,300 of income on their own. And finally, we must check here if the dependent qualifies for a multiple support declaration. None of these boxes apply to our scenario, so we'll click Continue. This takes us back to the dependent and qualifying child menu, and you can see our dependent information here. You can choose to edit this dependent using the pencil icon here at the right, or you can delete the dependent by choosing the trash can icon. Let's click Continue. Next, the program prompts for the Advanced Child Tax Credit questions. Did the taxpayer or spouse have a principal place of abode, a main home, in the U.S. for more than half of 2021? We will choose yes. And did the taxpayer or spouse receive any advanced child tax credit payments? There are no advanced child tax credit payments listed here, so we'll select no. You can also choose to come back to this later. This is a useful feature if you are just getting personal information entered to get a return started, but the taxpayer hasn't gotten their documents to you yet. In other cases, we'll just click Continue to save our information now. This takes us to the Income menu. In our tax scenario, we have a W-2 to enter for Whitney, so we'll choose Form W-2 here at the top of the Income menu. There are different types of W-2s, and you can make the selection here at these checkboxes. Standard W-2 is marked by default, but you can change it to Corrected W-2, Substitute W-2, or Railroad W-2 if those conditions apply to the source document that your taxpayer gave you. Next, we need to enter the employee information from the W-2. And if the employee has a foreign address, we can check this box. Otherwise, the address that we entered in personal information will pre-fill here, and we'll verify that that's correct by looking at the W-2 before moving on to the employer information. We'll start by entering the employer's EIN. Now that we have the employer's EIN entered, we can enter the employer name. We can check here if the employer has a foreign address, otherwise we'll leave that box unmarked, and we'll enter their domestic address. Next, we'll enter the zip code, and when I tab out of zip code, the program will fill in the town and state for me. Next, we'll scroll down to the wages section. Item 1 corresponds to box 1 on the W-2. So following the information on the W-2, we'll enter in the wages, we'll tab over to federal tax withheld, and enter the amount from the W-2. The program pre-fills box 3, 4, 5, and 6 for you based on the information in box 1 and 2. Verify that these calculations are correct against the source document that you have in your hand from the taxpayer before moving on. There is no dependent care expense on this W-2. There is no box 12 code, but if there was, we would enter it here and the amount. There is no box 13 condition. So we're going to skip down to state information. The state here is Georgia. We'll enter the state EIN. The state wages may differ from the federal wages on the source document W-2, so check that carefully and make your entry. Next, we'll enter the amount of state tax paid or state tax withheld. Any local wages would go here in 18. Local taxes would go here in 19, and a locality name in 20 if that applies. You can add an extra state by choosing the Add State button here if there's more than one state on the W-2. Please note that you can add up to 4 states on a W-2. So if there is a 5th state, we'd need to create a new W-2. Once we've got the information entered for W-2 and we've verified it against the source document, we can choose to save and enter another or continue. Back here on the W-2 menu, and you can see the W-2 that we just entered. You can choose the blue pencil at the right to edit and the red trash can to delete. You can also choose Add a Form W-2 here on this menu if the taxpayer brings you another W-2 later in the preparation process. And here on the right, you can see the return summary, giving us an approximate calculation of the taxpayer's AGI, federal refund, and state refund. We'll click Continue now. Here is the tax return summary page. If you remember back in configuration, there is a checkbox to show this page as a summary by default or in the 1040 view. If you chose to view it in summary view, you can toggle this button here to change it to a 1040 view. When you switch to 1040 view, the lines of the 1040 are hot links to that entry menu in our program. So for example, if your taxpayer has an IRA distribution and you'd rather go to that straight here on the form, you can click on IRA distributions and it will take you to the entry menu for that item. We're going to click Continue here on the summary view page. Now the program, after calculating, tells us there's an error on our return, and it needs to be corrected before we can continue. We have not entered any health insurance info. You can click on the Fix This box to go directly to that entry point and fix the mistake. Here, the mistake is that we did not enter in whether the taxpayer used the Affordable Care Act for their health insurance plan this year. Our taxpayer did not, so we'll choose No and then continue. Now you can see the state return menu. We can print the state return using the printer icon. We can edit the state return using the pencil icon, or delete it using the trash can icon. If there's more than one state, you can add another state return by choosing Add Another State Return right here. We're going to click Continue. There's one more piece of information on our practice return PDF. We need to enter the daycare information for the dependent care expenses. I'm going to show you how to use the form finder to get there. I type or start typing in dependent. Form 2441 for child and dependent care expenses comes up, and I can click directly on that title to go to the child care credit page. I recommend using the form finder when you know exactly what form you're looking for. It will save you a lot of time instead of going through the menus one by one. All right, you need to enter the child care credit information provided to us from the taxpayer. Under Step 1, Child Care Providers, we'll choose Add a Child Care Provider. If the child care provider was an individual, we need to enter their Social Security number or their ITIN. Our taxpayer has a daycare service, so we're going to start by entering their EIN. Next, we'll enter the provider's name. Next, we'll enter the provider's address. We can check this box if they have a foreign address, but this is a domestic provider, so we'll enter the address provided. And we'll enter the zip code. The program will pre-fill the city and state. If the provider is tax exempt, we would choose this box. If the provider is a household employee or a nanny, we would check this box. And we would check here if the taxpayer is living abroad and used a foreign care provider. Next, we need to enter the amount paid to the provider for childcare. In this case, it was $3,800. If the provider has a Hawaii tax ID number, we could enter that 12-digit number here. And if we have it, we could enter the provider's phone number here. Note that if the taxpayer is filing a California state return, the provider's phone number is required to be entered here. So we can leave this blank and click Continue. Now that we've completed Step 1, by entering the child care provider's information, we need to go on to Step 2 and choose the dependent for whom we are entering expenses. So we'll go down here to Jeremy Refund, click the pencil, enter the amount paid for Jeremy, which is the full amount, $3,800. If this qualifying person had no expenses or zero in the amount paid, we would check this box and click Continue to save. Back on Form 2441, we've completed Step 1 and Step 2. We allocated the expenses to the dependent. If there were qualifying persons on the return, we could add them here and allocate expenses to them. But we do not have a qualifying person in this scenario, so we'll continue to page 2. It's important not to skip page 2. Page 2 is the worksheet for the child care credit, and we need to examine the choices here carefully. If the taxpayer had additional income that we need to consider for the purposes of the credit, we would enter that here. If they had employer-paid dependent care benefits, we would enter that amount here. Any forfeited employer-paid benefits would go here. Carryover employer-paid benefits from the previous year would go here. Benefits received from a sole proprietorship or partnership would go here. We also need to choose if the taxpayer paid any expenses for the year 2020 during the tax year 2021. We're going to select No. And finally, we need to mark whether the taxpayer is considered unmarried for the purposes of the credit. Our taxpayer appears to be unmarried, so we will select Yes. When we've fulfilled all the requirements on the worksheet with the information that we have, we'll click Continue. You can edit Form 2441 by selecting the pencil or select the trash can to delete it. We're going to click Continue. This takes us back to the tax return summary page, and you see that the information has changed here slightly based on the dependent care expenses that we entered. Let's review what we've done so far. We'll go through the steps we've accomplished here on the left navigation menu. We entered the taxpayer's basic information and dependent information. In the federal section, we entered W-2 income. We answered the health insurance question, and we completed the state return. We went to the summary print section, which we're at now, and I showed you how to print results. Remember, it's very important, always print the PDF of the return when you're verifying that the return has been prepared correctly, that the calculations have been performed correctly, and that the information you've entered on the return is complete. You'll note here on Form 8879 that the preparer's PIN that you made up when you were setting up the preparer's account has been pre-filled on Form 8879 here. Verify that the taxpayer's personal information is correct. You can see the dependent that we entered here, the relationship, and that they're eligible for the child tax credit. Here on line 27A, you can see the calculation of earned income credit, and at line 28, the refundable child tax credit or additional child tax credit. At line 32, we can see the total of payments and refundable credits. In the refund section at line 34, you can see the amount of the taxpayer's federal refund. If in office setup you had elected to pre-fill the third-party designee information, that would be here in the third-party designee section. The taxpayer has not signed their return yet, so the taxpayer signature is still blank. And you can see that the paid preparer's information here that we entered when we were configuring the program is pre-filling on the form as it should. Now that you know how to double check your work by printing the return to PDF, let's switch back to ProWeb. Next on our tour of the left navigation menu, let's go to the e-file section. Before we move on in the e-file section, we need to answer the due diligence questions for this taxpayer. First, was the taxpayer or spouse a non-resident alien for any part of the year? We'll select no. Is the taxpayer or spouse a qualifying child of another person? Did you complete the return based on information for tax year 2021 provided by the taxpayer or reasonably obtained by you, the preparer? We'll answer yes. Did you interview the taxpayer, ask adequate questions, and document their responses to determine that the taxpayer is eligible to claim the credits and/or head of household filing status? We did that. Did you review adequate information to determine the taxpayer is eligible to claim the credits and in what amount? We did that. We'll answer yes. Did any information provided by the taxpayer, a third party, or reasonably known to you in connection with preparing the return appear to be incorrect, incomplete, or inconsistent? The answer here is no. I do want to mention a lot of times preparers will skip through here answering yes to all the questions quickly. And this question about information being incorrect, incomplete, or inconsistent, if you answer it yes, it will trigger other questions and possibly mess up the taxpayer's eligibility for credits. So read the due diligence questions carefully and caution your office preparers to do the same. Next question, did you satisfy the record retention requirement? And to meet this requirement, we need a copy of any documents that the taxpayer provided to determine their eligibility for the credits. We'll answer yes. We can enter any notes or documents that we relied on here in this box. Next on due diligence, did you ask the taxpayer whether they could provide documentation to substantiate eligibility for the amount of credits and filing status claimed on the return? Yes. Did you ask the taxpayer if any credits were disallowed or reduced in a prior year? We'll answer yes. And this is another one of those questions you don't want to blow through. If you answer yes to this question, you will have to fill out the form for a disallowed credit in a previous year. And this is not a common scenario. Next in due diligence, we need to answer questions about the qualifying child. Is the child currently a qualifying child on any other individual's tax return? We'll answer no. Next, the EIC questions. Have you determined that the taxpayer is eligible to claim the EIC for the number of children for whom EIC is claimed? Yes. Did you explain to the taxpayer that they may not claim EIC if the taxpayer has not lived with the child for over half the year, even if they have supported the child? Yes. And finally, did you explain to the taxpayer the rules about claiming EIC when a child is the qualifying child of more than one person? That does not apply to our dependent, so we'll just say yes. You can read over the tiebreaker rules here when a dependent belongs to more than one taxpayer. Next, we have to answer questions about the child tax credit. Does the child reside with the taxpayer who is claiming child tax credit? Yes. Did you explain to the taxpayer that they may not claim child tax credit if the taxpayer has not lived with the child for over half of the year, even if they supported the child, unless the custodial parent has released a claim to exemption for the child? We'll say we did that. Did you explain to the taxpayer the rules about claiming child tax credit for a child of divorced or separated parents? We'll choose yes. Next, we have a couple of head of household questions for the filing status. Have you determined that the taxpayer was unmarried or considered unmarried on the last day of the tax year and provided more than half of the cost of keeping up a home for the year for a qualifying person? Yes. And do you certify that all answers on Form 8867 are, to the best of your knowledge, true, correct, and complete? Yes. Remember that as a paid preparer, due diligence is a requirement. Always read through the due diligence questions carefully. Don't answer them in a hurry. This box reminds you of your due diligence obligations and the penalties, which are $520 for each credit for which you failed to comply. When you've reviewed the due diligence questions, the answers you selected, click Continue. Next, you'll see the Form 8867 Due Diligence Checklist. Because we answered all of our questions carefully, all of the selections here are in green. The American Opportunity Tax Credit does not apply to this taxpayer, so it is listed in blue as non-applicable. You can make changes to the due diligence checklist here, or choose Continue. Here you can enter a miscellaneous statement, enter your note here. You can choose to make this a private statement by selecting this box. When you're done with your miscellaneous statement, choose Continue. Here on the miscellaneous statement page, you can review the statement that you entered, edit it with a pencil, or delete it with the trash can. You can also add another statement by choosing Add a Miscellaneous Statement here. For right now, we'll click Continue. All right, remember before we got into due diligence, we were on our way to the e-file page. And now that we've fulfilled that requirement, we can continue with the return details page. Note that the timeline up here is clickable. You could click State ID License to skip to that section, Custom Questions, or skip to the submission page. We're just going to review our return details in order. First, the ERO information. If you have more than one ERO in your office, you could select them from this drop-down menu. Next, in the federal return section, we need to select how the client would like to send their tax return for their federal refund from this drop-down menu. If you had any banks selected in Office Setup and you're going to offer bank products in your office, this is where those bank products would be listed, and you could make your selection from this menu. For right now, I'm going to choose paper return. Also, if you are only trying to transmit the state return at this time, you could select this box. We've chosen a refund type for the federal return, and now we must choose one for the state return as well. We use this drop-down menu to select the product that we want. Next, for Form 8879, we'll need to enter the taxpayer's email address. The program automatically generates a taxpayer's PIN here, and the ERO's PIN that you set up in configuration will appear here pre-filled. Next, we'll choose Optional Questions. If you want to enter information for a third-party designee, you can do so here. You can also choose to clear the information that's here by selecting Clear. The self-prepared return can be selected here. I want to define what a self-prepared return is before we move on. Self-prepared means that the taxpayer prepared their return on their own and brought it to you for data entry and e-filing only. You would not use this option, for example, if the preparer in your office is doing their own tax return. Self-prepared means a taxpayer brought their completed return to you strictly for e-filing. So choose self-prepared return if that applies. If not, click Continue. Next, the fee summary. Remember, in configuration, we set a minimum and maximum fee along with some form fees for our office. You can choose Show Itemized Fees to see a list of all of those fees that apply to this return. Remember, I set a flat rate of $400 for Form 1040, so that fee appears here. And I set a $50 fee for a Georgia resident return, which appears here on the itemized fees list. Review the fees carefully. We can apply additional fees and discounts by clicking here. Remember, we set up those additional fees and discounts when we were configuring the office, and this is where you'll select them. I want to charge a copy fee for a printed return to this taxpayer, and they are a friend of mine, so I'll choose that discount. When you've made your selections, choose Close. Now you can see that the custom printed return fee of $15 has been applied, along with a friends and family discount of $15, so the fee has not changed. After reviewing the fees, which do not include bank and processing fees at this time, click Continue. Next, if your taxpayer provided a state driver's license or ID, you can enter that information here. You can choose that they do not have a driver's license or ID here, or choose Not Provided, which is the case for us, and we'll click Continue. Next, remember in configuration, we set up some custom questions, and here is where those questions appear for answering when your preparers are in the e-file section of a return. So we'll select No to Government Employee. We'll select that yes, Whitney was referred from Facebook from our Facebook page, and No for Instagram. When you've answered all the custom questions, click Continue. Because in the federal return type, we selected that this is a paper return, a message pops up reminding to collect fees. Remember, when a taxpayer does not use a bank product to collect their refund, you are responsible for collecting your preparation fees directly from the taxpayer. This is just a reminder, and we'll click OK. Finally, we're here on the submission page of the return. And this is where you will have the taxpayer sign the return if they're in your office, using either the mouse or the Topaz signature pad. You can choose Edit Signature. I'm just signing with my mouse now to capture that signature. Remember, if you have the Topaz pad enabled in your office, your taxpayer will not be able to use the mouse. I can choose Cancel. I can clear the signature and re-enter it. Let's do that. That one was ugly. This one's even uglier. And finally, we'll choose Save. Here, we review that the federal refund amount of $6,954 has an applied return method of paper return, and we can edit the refund method here. That will take us back to the return details page. I'm going to click on Submission page here to get back to where we were. You can also edit the Georgia state return method by choosing Edit Refund Method here. We'll review the Form 8879 information, the taxpayers and ERO's PINs here. You can edit those PINs by clicking Edit PIN. You'll need to enter a preparer's electronic signature here. You can choose Edit Signature to do that. Sign using your mouse or your Topaz pad if you have that enabled. You can cancel, clear the signature and redo it, or save. Next, if someone referred your tax client to your office, you can enter that in the field below. And you could search by contact if you have any contacts entered. You can choose Add New Referrer and add their name here. Next, on the submission page, you can choose to print tax documents. Remember in configuration when we set up those custom print sets, this is where those custom print sets come into play. Here is our test print set ready to be used. You'll also see the print sets that come with the program by default. One copy federal and state is probably the most used, but you have other selections to make here as well. You can do a copy of the federal only or the 1040 only. You can choose only to print the signature documents or the return invoice. All of that is here on the submission page at Print Tax Documents. And when you choose the print set that you'd like to apply, you can choose Print here to print it to PDF. The next section on the submission page is Share Tax Documents. We can email a copy of the return, which is securely encrypted. To do that, choose Compose Email. The file attachment, the encrypted return, is applied automatically. you must set a password for the taxpayer to be able to open that encrypted document. And here is a good time for me to mention that if you are emailing an encrypted tax return to your taxpayer, the most secure way to view that form is on an actual computer. Once you've set a password and confirmed it here, you can move on to compose the body of the email. Say it would be from you, the preparer. So enter your email address here. Verify that the taxpayer's email address is correct. The subject can be the default tax information or something custom like urgent tax information or confidential tax information. And you can use the default message body or customize this message to whatever you would like it to be. You can print a receipt for your taxpayer here next to the Compose Email button. Next on the submission page, you can choose to create a customer portal, or if they use Taxes to Go mobile app to send you their return information, you could send the return back to Taxes to Go for the taxpayer to sign using this button. In a separate video, I will go over the details of how to use Customer Portal and Taxes to Go. For right now, we'll leave this section alone. Next, review the client fees. You can print the invoice here. Because this is a paper return, we have to collect the fee from the taxpayer ourselves, and we can mark how the client paid for their preparation fees by selecting check, cash, or credit card from the drop-down menu here. If the taxpayer has paid us, we can also mark the invoice as paid here. Remember, in configuration, we set up return tags to help us filter information about the tax office. So any return tags that you set up will be available here for choice on the submission page of the return. Next, we need to either mark this return as ready for review, or we can mark the tax return complete. If you mark a return complete and you need to make changes to it after that fact, you can still edit the return as much as you need to. Now that we've completed all of the requirements on the submission page, we can choose Save and Exit. I chose Save and Exit so that I could take you back here to the main menu and click on Client Search. Now on the Office client list, we can see the return that we just created for Whitney Refund. The status of the return is paper. The state status is here. You can click on the 3 dots to view the state details in progress. If we need to add any notes, we can choose the flag icon and enter notes about this return. Those notes can be printed to PDF or exported as a CSV file, and click Save here to save your note. The tag icon is blue because we've applied a couple of tags to this return, and you can click the icon to add additional tags and choose Save. Another important thing I want to show you is the Tools drop-down menu here on the client list. At the Tools drop-down menu, you can choose Scanned Documents to view any documents that the taxpayer has sent you through the customer portal or app, which we'll review in the next video. You can email the return to the taxpayer from here. You can check client status if the return has been transmitted. You can choose privacy settings to mark this review as private from everyone else in your office, and set a password to open the return. I recommend that you make these passwords simple if you use them. You can click Continue to save that security setting on the return. Back on the Tools drop-down menu, we can change the preparer on the return. Here on the Change Preparer menu, I can change to any other preparer in the office. Back on the Tools drop-down menu, if I'm communicating with the taxpayer through the Taxes to Go app, I can access the chat history here. You can choose to sync the return with the mobile app here. Now that I've shown you how to work with a return on the client list, let's go back into this test return. We'll choose Select here. When we select the return from the client list and we go back into the return, we'll land on the tax return summary page. Let's quickly review our options here. We can choose Preview Return at the top or Print Results on the left navigation menu. To access the PDF copy, you can choose Help and Support at any time when you're working in a return. This shows you the number to call TaxSlayer Pro support. You can access our suggestion box, which is where you can make program suggestions for improvements. You can initiate contact with TaxSlayer Pro support by sending us an email, or you can chat with us if you're not into phone calls or emails. And most importantly, you can choose to search our knowledge base. You can see that our knowledge base is divided into categories by product, and we have an entire section of ProWeb articles to help you out with any questions that you have when you're using TaxSlayer ProWeb. ProWeb articles in the knowledge base are divided by category. There are general ProWeb articles. There's a category of navigational, where do I enter this in TaxSlayer ProWeb? A general FAQ. We take these FAQ questions from your support calls. Next, there's a section of configuration articles to help you manage the features on the configuration menu. And finally, there's a section on reports. I want to take you back to the knowledge base page. There is an entire section as well of articles supporting the Taxes to Go mobile app and the customer portal. There's also a section on bank support, which includes a bank FAQ, an overview of how to work with our bank partners, and separate sections for each of the banks that you can choose to use with your ProWeb program. Let's get back to ProWeb. Continuing our review of the returns features, you can choose the name of the taxpayer here for a drop-down list of options. You can select to create a customer portal for the taxpayer here. If there are any documents that have been sent to you by the taxpayer through the portal or app, you can access those documents while you're working in a return from here. To change the return to Spanish, you can mark Si hablas español, and there's a section for notes, helpful tools, and quick file option. You can also save and exit the return from this drop-down menu, or choose the Save and Exit button right next to it. If you need to apply an amended return, you'll choose that from the left navigation menu. This opens the menu for the amended tax return form 1040X. There are instructions for completing this section of the return. Amending a return takes a few steps, and you should read this carefully before continuing with the 1040X form. At this time, we're done preparing Whitney's return, and we've explored all of the features and options that you as the preparer have when you're working inside a tax return. So we're going back to the e-file section. Although we previously marked this return for paper filing, I want to demonstrate the e-file process. So we chose e-file from the left navigation menu, and we're choosing to e-file the original tax return. So we'll click continue. If you are filing an amended tax return, you could make that selection here. In the return details section, we need to change the federal return type from paper to an e-file. So I'm going to do e-file with a paper check because I don't have the taxpayer's banking information for direct deposit. I'm also going to change the state return type to e-file with a paper check. We've already reviewed the rest of the information here, so I'll just click continue to save. We reviewed the fee summary, the state ID license, and the custom questions section, so I'm going to use this navigation bar to get directly to the submission page. We collected the taxpayer's signature, the 8879 information, the preparer signed the return, and the client fees were reviewed previously and are correct. We've marked the tax return as complete, so the final step here is to click Transmit Return. When you click Transmit Return, the program will give you a message that says Success. The return was successfully submitted for processing at this date and time. We can click Main Menu to get back to our main menu, or simply click Done here. We're back on the main menu, and we want to go to Client Search now. You can see that the status of this return has changed. Before it was in progress, and then it was paper. Now that we've e-filed it, the status is transmitted, and the status will remain in transmitted until we receive an acknowledgement from the IRS, at which time it will change to accepted or rejected. Now I want to show you how to use client status to check on the status of a return. There are two ways to do this, and I've got a rejected return here as an example. This return has a status of rejected, and you'll see that rejected is blue and underlined, which means it's a clickable link. When we click that link, we'll see the IRS acknowledgement for this return, the acknowledgement date, status, the refund amount, whether it was an extension, and additional information that will help us solve the reject. You can also check client status and get more information about a return by going to the left navigation menu and choosing Client Status. Let's choose the Whitney refund that we just transmitted. Here you can see the client's information, the dependent. You can see that the IRS has not yet received the return that we just transmitted, the return type, the refund disbursement method, the date and time stamp for when it was transmitted to the IRS, and the acknowledgement status, the refund and balance due, whether the IRS has made a direct deposit of the refund, the number of times we've transmitted the return, whether we're waiting for a federal acknowledgement that is outstanding, and the submission ID. In the next section, you can review the amount of the refund, state refund, total refund amount, the amount of federal refund deposit that was received, if any, the state deposit amount received, if any, total deposit amount, the total fees, and the net refund. This section is useful if your return has a bank product on it. You can see the return transmission history. The Print 9325 option here will print the acknowledgement for this return. When you're done reviewing client status, choose Cancel to get back to the client list. I just demonstrated how to transmit a return from the e-file page inside of an individual return. But what if you have a bunch of returns to transmit all at once in a batch? Let's start here on the main menu. We're going to scroll down to Transmissions. This opens the transmission table in ProWeb. You can see that I don't have any returns on the transmission table right now, but you can choose Add Returns. This will bring up a list of available returns in your office that have been marked complete, and you can check the box to add them to the transmission table, or you can choose Check All. And when you're done, click Add Returns. Now I have 2 returns on my transmission table. You can choose Check All to select all the returns for transmission, Uncheck All to deselect them. You can select the returns and click to take them off of the transmission table, and you can choose Delete All to clear your transmission table. When you've got your entire batch selected on the transmission table, you'll come to the Transmit Selected Returns button and click it. Just like transmitting from the e-file page inside a return, you'll get a notification that the returns have been transmitted. And we'll select Back. That concludes this video on how to start and work with a return and transmit it in ProWeb. In the next video, we'll cover the customer portal and taxes to go.